Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time.
Picture this, Berlin, 1943. The streets are cold, eerily quiet, and you can feel eyes watching from every shadow. Every footstep echoes with suspicion. Right in the heart of Nazi Germany, the Reich Chancellery looms like this dark fortress, its walls practically oozing with secrets. But here's the thing. Inside one of those sprawling government buildings, there's this ordinary civil servant named Fritz Kolbe. And he's doing something that would get him shot if anyone found out. He doesn't look like a spy at all. No fancy disguise, no weapons, definitely not some James Bond type. Just a regular guy in a pressed suit, glasses, briefcase, your typical paper pusher. But tucked inside that diplomatic pouch he's carrying so casually, hundreds of Nazi secrets, enemy agent lists, weapon facility locations, troop movements, basically the blueprints to Hitler's entire war machine. And he's about to hand it all over to the Americans. His codename was George, and to the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, this guy wasn't just another informant. He was pure gold. Today on History Crossroads, we're diving into the incredible story of Fritz Kolbe, a man with the most boring desk job you can imagine, but also a fierce conscience and nerves of absolute steel. Right from the heart of the Third Reich, he risked everything to bring down the regime he secretly despised. So what made this mild-mannered clerk betray his own country? How did he manage to avoid getting caught in a city crawling with secret police? And why did it take Germany decades to recognize what America knew all along? Stick around. This is the true story of the Nazi clerk who became the Allies' most valuable spy. Fritz Kolbe was the kind of guy who lived by routines. A career bureaucrat through and through. In any other time, any other Germany, he probably would have just quietly retired after decades of filing papers and following protocols. But this wasn't just any Germany. This was Hitler's Germany, a country wrapped in fear and rotting from the inside out. Born in 1900, Kolbe had seen it all. The German Empire falling apart, the chaos of the Weimar Republic, and then the Nazis clawing their way to power. By the time World War II was raging, he'd landed a job at the German Foreign Ministry as a diplomatic courier. Now, that might sound boring, but it gave him something most spies would kill for: access. But here's the thing. Kolbe wasn't trying to be a spy. He was something much rarer. A German who watched his country being consumed by evil and just refused to go along with it. He absolutely hated the Nazis. Hated their lies, their brutality, the way they'd infected every corner of German life with their poisonous ideology. And what really aided him was watching his fellow Germans just fall in line, one by one. Years later, he'd say, "I knew I couldn't shoot anyone, but I could do something." And what did he have? Access to information, and a conscience that wouldn't let him sleep at night. That combination was about to make him one of the most valuable assets the Allies ever had, though it nearly got him killed in the process. But having a conscience wasn't enough. He needed someone to listen. When the British basically ignored him, he took a massive risk that would change everything. He reached out to the Americans. And waiting in the shadows of neutral Switzerland was a man named Allen Dulles, ready to hear what Fritz Kolbe had to say. So picture Bern, Switzerland. This quiet city full of cozy cafes, alpine views, and more secrets than you could shake a stick at. It's the summer of 1943, and Fritz Kolbe is about to cross a line that most Germans wouldn't even dare think about. He didn't come as some desperate defector looking for asylum. He came as a messenger, and what he brought with him was basically the Nazi regime's entire bloodstream. Hundreds of classified documents. Now, Allen Dulles had been running spies for the Office of Strategic Services, and he'd seen plenty of people walk through his door, claiming to have valuable information. But Kolbe? Kolbe was different. He wasn't asking for money or a new identity. He was just calm, determined, almost stubborn about it. And the stuff he handed over? Absolutely mind-blowing. Documents straight from Hitler's inner circle, details about secret weapons programs, the identities of Nazi agents planted in Allied countries. This wasn't some amateur operation. The information was the real deal, authenticated and rich with details no outsider could possibly know. Dulles gave him a code name, George. Kolbe's plan was brilliantly simple and terrifyingly dangerous. He'd keep doing his courier job in Berlin, memorizing sensitive documents when he could, and when possible, physically smuggling them in his diplomatic pouch. Every single trip back to Switzerland was a roll of the dice. One wrong move, one suspicious guard, one bad feeling from the wrong person, and he'd be dead. But Kolbe had figured out how to become invisible. He used all these mundane office tricks, slipping important papers between boring memos, fudging timestamps, leaving fake documents as decoys. He never lingered in Bern. He'd hand over his intelligence, have a quick meeting with Dulles or one of his contacts, and then vanish back into the crowd. The guy had the most forgettable face you could imagine, but his information? Absolutely unforgettable.
You know what's interesting? Kolbe hated being called a spy.
He saw himself as a patriot, not to Hitler's government, but to what Germany could be, what it should be, a country ruled by principles, not fear. He once said, "This isn't betrayal, this is rescue." And so, under the codename George, Fritz Kolbe began his one-man war against the Nazi regime, operating right from the belly of the beast. Let me tell you something about Fritz Kolbe. He didn't deal in gossip or half-truths. What he delivered to Alan Dulles was pure gold, the kind of intelligence that made generals stop what they were doing and war rooms go dead silent. One of his biggest wins? A complete list of Nazi agents operating in neutral countries, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, you name it. With just one intelligence drop, Kolbe had basically blown the cover of an entire spy network. Allied counterintelligence was able to roll up these operations and shut down information pipelines that had been feeding Berlin crucial intelligence for months. But that was just the beginning. Kolbe got his hands on detailed reports about Germany's desperate push to develop those terrifying V weapons, the new rockets and missiles they planned to use to level Allied cities. Thanks to his intelligence, the Allies were able to target and sabotage some of these launch sites before they could become fully operational. He also smuggled out German diplomatic communications, which gave the OSS this incredible window into how the Nazis were really thinking about the war. Their propaganda strategies, their internal conflicts, even the rifts between Hitler's top officials. It was like having a front-row seat to the Third Reich's war room. Alan Dulles, who'd been in the espionage game for years, called Kolbe the most valuable spy the U.S. had in the war. And that wasn't just flattery. That was the honest truth. Kolbe's intelligence saved lives, shortened battles, and exposed enemy strategies from the inside out. But even with all this incredible success, Kolbe remained a ghost. No recognition, no celebration. And back in Germany, he was dangerously alone. You have to understand, in Nazi Berlin, even the walls had ears. Kolbe was living this double life that would drive most people insane. On the surface, he was just another dutiful civil servant, organizing cables and managing diplomatic schedules. But underneath, he was systematically dismantling his own government's war effort, one stolen document at a time. Every single day was a test of his nerves. A whisper in the hallway, a strange look in the elevator, someone asking too many questions. Any of it could mean he'd been found out. And he knew that, if the Gestapo caught him, there wouldn't be a trial. There wouldn't be a second chance. Just a bullet. The paranoia was crushing. Most of his friends had either drunk the Nazi Kool-Aid or simply disappeared. Kolbe understood the survival rules perfectly. Trust no one, tell no one, leave no trace. At night he'd sometimes burn random papers, just to feel like he had some control over something. During the day he'd memorize lines of classified text, repeating them silently on the train until they were burned into his memory. Every trip to Switzerland became more dangerous. Security was tightening. Borders were getting tense. There was this one time when a guard at the Swiss frontier stared at his diplomatic pouch just a little too long. Kolbe just smiled, made some casual comment about train schedules, and walked on. Legs steady, stomach doing backflips. He was meticulous about changing his methods. Never carried the same type of documents twice, varied his routes, hid in plain sight. But that fear, it never left him. It was there when he woke up, when he went to sleep, in every breath he took. And yet, he kept going. Because for Kolbe, this wasn't just about bringing down the Nazis. He was trying to save his country's soul, to prove that at least one German in a gray suit still had a conscience. When the Third Reich finally fell, millions of people celebrated their liberation. But for Fritz Kolbe, the end of the war was just the beginning of a different kind of hell. Germany was in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, streets cracked open like wounds that would never heal. The swastika was gone, but so were a lot of the illusions people had lived with. Kolbe came home to this wreckage not as a hero, but as a marked man. No medals, no parades, no thank yous. To a lot of Germans, he was just a traitor who'd sold out their secrets to the enemy. Even people who'd secretly hated the Nazis often couldn't bring themselves to associate with him. The post-war foreign ministry blacklisted him. Job opportunities dried up. Friends kept their distance. Alan Dulles and the OSS offered him a new life in America, but Kolbe turned them down. He didn't want to run away. He wanted to clear his name, to reclaim the life he'd sacrificed. Instead, he ended up scraping by, eventually finding work with a US-backed reconstruction agency. It was honest work, but completely anonymous. The world was moving on, and Kolbe, one of the most effective spies in history, was being left behind. For decades, his story remained buried in classified files. The missions stayed secret, the sacrifices unrecognized. And Kolbe, the man who'd risked everything to help defeat Hitler, remained a forgotten figure in his own homeland. It wasn't until the early 2000s, long after his death, that the German government finally publicly acknowledged his courage. They named a school after him, some streets too. Intelligence agencies now study his methods as textbook examples of effective espionage. But all that recognition came too late for Fritz Kolbe. He died in 1971, largely unknown, never really knowing if his sacrifices had been worth it. Yet history remembers him now for what he truly was. Not a traitor, but a patriot who bet everything on the hope that doing right could still matter, even in the darkest of times. When Alan Dulles called Fritz Kolbe the most important spy of the Second World War, he wasn't being dramatic. He was stating a fact. Kolbe didn't need fancy gadgets or weapons. He had courage, access, and a conscience that cut sharper than any blade. He fought his war not on battlefields, but in quiet offices and train stations. He stood alone, unseen and unthanked. And in doing so, he helped change the course of history. Look, If this story has moved you the way it's moved us, make sure to follow History Crossroads wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for more incredible stories from the past. Thanks for listening, everyone. And remember, the past isn't just history. It's full of crossroads. And we're all standing at one right now.